I think it's fair to say that Title IX has been a serious problem, right? It was made in good faith around good intentions, but as they say, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. I want to start by looking briefly at this story. Feminists rally to defend female professor accused of harassment by male student. Me Too madness. It's wrong to use Title IX, a feminist tool, quote, to take down a feminist. And I just want you to remember this and just, this story exists. And now we're going to go to this story. The ACLU condemns DeVos's Title IX reforms, says these due process safeguards inappropriately favor the accused. The ACLU is upset that Betsy DeVos has said that we need to reform Title IX and make changes that essentially guarantee due process. Now, for those that aren't familiar with Title IX, it basically states that a university, a learning institution, cannot discriminate based on gender. By that logic, many people said that if a university doesn't investigate claims of assault, they would be biased against the victim. And thus, we had seen a wave of stories about men who were accused, some falsely, some justly. But these schools don't operate off of they don't operate on the presumption of innocence, and they don't operate on a verdict beyond a reasonable doubt. Basically, they operate on what's called a preponderance of evidence. If someone comes forward and says this person did this, they don't try and determine whether or not it is more likely to have happened beyond a reasonable doubt. They try to determine whether or not a preponderance of evidence suggests it may have happened. And based on that, they will expel you, they will punish you, and during the investigation, often they kick these students out, basically saying, you can't be on campus because someone's accused you. Well, Betsy DeVos wants to revise that. I'm not an expert on the issue, so I don't really have a strong opinion, other than I would say due process should be a guarantee for all peoples, regardless of if you're male, female, or whatever. So if the argument is that DeVos's Title IX reforms would strengthen due process, I would say it's a good thing. But the ACLU says otherwise. They say on Reason, it's no surprise that victims' rights activists and their allies are furious about the Education Department's proposed changes to Title IX, the federal statute that deals with gender discrimination on campus. It is surprising, however, to see the American Civil Liberties Union joining in this chorus. The ACLU has long defended the rights of, I'm just not going to read this because YouTube's going to punish my channel. Suffice it to say, the ACLU has a history of defending pretty fringe groups, The group works tirelessly to protect due process, even for the least sympathetic among us. Yes, like actual hardcore bigots is about as extreme as I think I can speak on YouTube these days. Yet the ACLU has condemned the new Title IX rules, declaring on Twitter, the proposed rule would make schools less safe for survivors of assault and harassment when there is already alarmingly high rates of campus assaults and harassment that go unreported. It promotes an unfair process, inappropriately favoring the accused and letting schools ignore their responsibility under Title IX to respond promptly and fairly to complaints of abuse. Except, why should the school be handling it in the first place? Law enforcement should. I understand there's a big challenge here. I understand that many women are reluctant to go to law enforcement, but you can't restrict due process because of the psychological factors at play. If a victim isn't willing to go to law enforcement to have this issue addressed, then what can you really do? We cannot punish the innocent or punish people without evidence. Otherwise, we have an ineffective system, an inefficient system. Okay, all right. We'll carry on. I am astonished to see the ACLU take the position that a government policy gives an accused person too many rights, especially when these rights are the things that ACLU has generally supported. In other words, they are not weird new rights invented out of thin air. These are standard protections that regrettably were not applied to campus misconduct adjudication during the Obama years. The Title IX reforms were announced Friday morning. They greatly strengthen due process protections for students accused of misconduct, and they relieve colleges of the burden of investigating suggestive speech that should be permissible on free speech grounds. Yeah, and this is just from the other day. Now, let me tell you what happened with the ACLU. I'll tell you what happened. They actually backpedaled on some free speech statements. They still kind of pretend to be supportive of free speech. But here's the thing. The ACLU got a lot of support when they opposed Donald Trump's travel moratorium, right? His travel ban. They said it was unconstitutional. The left rallied, pouring ridiculous amounts of money into the ACLU and signing up. But then something really interesting happened. The ACLU, ever the bastion of good principle, decided to defend the right of the Unite the Right organizers, saying that these people should have a right to hold their rally in Charlottesville. And the left lost their minds, saying, no, free speech is not a right. And the ACLU basically apologized and said, oh, maybe we shouldn't have done that, even though they've done it before, time and time again. And since then, they have taken the position of the ideological left instead of principle. The ACLU has been corrupted by money. That's plain and simple, okay? You look at how much money they brought in, you look at how their attitudes changed, and I think it's plain and simple to anybody, I think, that they are corrupted by the money they received from ideologues, and they don't want to give it up. It reminds me of that South Park episode that just aired the other night or whatever, where, I don't know if you saw it, Man Bear Pig is going around destroying everything, and he's basically a metaphor for global warming. And they basically say, we can get rid of Man Bear Pig, but we have to give back, we can't play Red Dead Redemption anymore or go to the movies or something. And everyone's like, well, we don't want to do that. Okay, well then we can ignore Man Bear Pig for 5 years, right? The basic idea is that the ACLU, you can uphold your principles and stand for what you believe in, but it means you gotta give that money back. Or not even give the money back, you gotta get rid of those donors who are mad at you now. And they don't want to do it. They'd rather just change their beliefs and support and speak out against due process for men because it makes money. And as you know, money is the language of business. So they say, the proposed regulation rightly rejects the incredibly overbroad, unconstitutional definition of harassment mandated by the Office for Civil Rights in its 2013 blueprint for colleges, said Hans Bader, a senior attorney at the Competitive Enterprise Institute and former Office for Civil Rights lawyer, in an email to Reason. The Foundation for Individual Rights in Education is also pleased with the proposal. Samantha Harris, a vice president at the group, says, the proposed regulations are a marked improvement over the previous guidance in a number of important ways. Some feminist groups see matters differently. The activist organization, I can't read their name, on YouTube, unfortunately, on campus has accused DeVos of making campuses more dangerous for women. Another activist group, Know Your Nine, describes the new rules as worse than we could have imagined. Oh, heaven forbid you required a burden of proof to make claims against individuals, and you can't just have people like punished or removed from school or locked up because you said so. Keep in mind, the new rules, while a significant improvement, are not radical. In fact, they adhere to the principles set forth by federal shield laws, which protect victims from having to discuss their past relationships during adjudication hearings. And while the new rules will indeed mandate cross-examination, they do not mandate direct cross-examination. Attorneys or support persons will do the questioning. This is a detail that many activists have overlooked in their criticism. Narwhal made the false claim that DeVos would allow victims to be questioned and re-traumatized by their attackers. And Rep. Joe Kennedy, Massachusetts, retweeted it. And I'm going to say this. I'm going to take a side here and say, listen, I try to sympathize and empathize with victims of any crime or any issue. But the fact of the matter is, you have to testify. You do. If you're going to be re-traumatized by something, that is, I'm sorry, I am. I don't want people to suffer. In no capacity do I want anyone to suffer. I want to alleviate the suffering. And that's why you can be cross-examined by your own attorney. But you do have to be. If you can't speak up and say, this is what happened, and here's my testimony, then there is less evidence, and it is less likely you will actually get the justice you seek. Life isn't easy. Sometimes things are difficult. I've heard, I'm not trying to relate this, but there are stories of people who have had their legs crushed by a falling tree, and they pulled out a pocket knife to save themselves, if you know what I mean, having to remove, right, their leg. Sometimes life is extremely hard, but survival and getting what you want means you have to overcome great odds. And the only way to strengthen yourself is to face the challenge set before you. If you walk away, then you don't get what you want. It's unfortunate, it really is. So they go on to say, I didn't expect an honest appraisal of the new rules from the likes of Naral, but I did figure the ACLU might appreciate some of the nuances involved here. Protecting women from misconduct is important, but so are liberal principles of justice, fairness, and the presumption of innocence. The ACLU recently broke with long-standing tradition to oppose the nomination of Brett Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court and ran ads saying that Kavanaugh's denials of impropriety should be dismissed, since other accused people like Bill Cosby and Harvey Weinstein also denied the charges against them. Between that and this, principles of due process and the presumption of innocence seem to be falling off the organization's radar as things that should be defended, at least when the person who needs these protections lacks sympathy from intersectional progressives. They say, even on this front, though, the critics of Title IX reform seem to forget that students who face misconduct adjudication on campuses are, as best as we can tell, disproportionately men of color and immigrants who will speak for them if not civil liberties organizations. And they have this tweet from Pope Hat, which is, I believe, like a liberal legal blog. I've been cautious and hesitant and suspicious when people have argued that the ACLU is no longer recognizably the ACLU, starting to think I was wrong. And then we have this tweet that says, a mind-boggling statement on proposed Title IX regs from ACLU, cross-examination by a lawyer is inappropriately favoring the accused, ensuring both parties have access to training materials and evidence. Does the ACLU now adopt those positions more broadly? Yes, the ACLU is corrupt. The ACLU is corrupt. They are corrupt. I used to like what they did because they would stand up for the most abhorrent individuals, opinions that I thought were downright wrong and that I don't appreciate. Look, it's no secret. I don't like hateful conduct and speech. I don't like people who say things that are meant to deride or target specific groups of people because I don't think it's efficient and I think it's unfairly targeting people. However, the government should not have a right to regulate that, and free speech and the First Amendment are extremely important. And that means when it comes to what the ACLU used to stand for, I appreciated it. Now what do they stand for? They're corrupt. They stand for whatever their dollars tell them to stand for. You want to influence the ACLU? Throw some money at them, and they'll bend over backwards to accommodate you, even if it means violating the rights of men of color and immigrants, because that's what they're really talking about here. You know what? ACLU, you're done. Anyway, I got a couple more videos coming up in just a few minutes, so stick around.